Ani, bonjour, hello and welcome to this next segment of Voices of Change, Cultivating Threads of the Future. This is Heather, and I am from the Working Together Wiijinokiiwag program. I am so happy that you're all here and back again, and I know and I trust that all of this information that we're bringing to you through the Working Together program will really help to build that container of understanding and unity and collaboration. I have a very special guest here with us today, and I'm going to introduce her. And now I'm going to get all freaked out because I don't want to say the name wrong. So I am going to say that this is Muck, Muck, oh my goodness, Muckpaloo. Please help me.
Okay, my name is Muckpaloo Ipeelie.
Thank you. See, and I totally got, and I knew I was going to do that. I was practicing it before so that I wasn't going to do that, and I did it, and I apologize, but thank you for sharing who you are.
It's
Um,
all good. You can try it as many times as you want, and I will say it as many times as you need.
I appreciate that so much. This lovely lady, I had the opportunity of meeting by chance, and I truly believe that these chance meetings are really meaningful and they will create pathways for us. But you have just started a couple of things here in Collingwood. You're a local girl just like me, and I really love that you are bringing awareness to the Indigenous voice inside of the community, as well as bringing awareness to your own culture of being Inuit to the community. I really want to dig into that because I don't know enough about it. I want to learn more about it, and I want to learn who you are, and I want to learn how we can best represent all of our peoples, our Indigenous peoples inside of this container. So I'm really excited to dig in, and I'm going to start, of course, by saying welcome, and we're going to take this next hour and really dig into a few things and learn about you. So, with that being said, who are you? And what are you bringing to this conversation and this container today?
So I'm just going to speak a little bit of Inuktitut, so just out of practicing. So Heather Ngai Tunga Supunga. So what I just said is welcome, Heather. I feel welcomed. And Muckpaloo Yunga. My name is Muckpaloo, and Ichalu Mute Tau Yunga. I'm from Iqaluit. So I was born in Iqaluit with my mom was there, and with her other daughter. She was 14 at the time. And when I was 3 months old, there are several factors of why my mom moved from Iqaluit down to Ottawa. So one of the major reasons is that I required healthcare. I had a cyst that needed to be taken care of, and I was a baby. And I actually remember the pain from that cyst, even though I was 3 months old. So every time that she tugged on my one arm to get my shirt on and then went to my other arm, I would scream like crazy. And she finally figured out to lift up my arm, and she saw the cyst. And after that, she took me to the doctor, and that's when the doctor said that I required surgery. So a lot of the time in the north, they're not quite as equipped in the south to do surgeries or things that are more complicated. So that meant that my mom had a flight ticket for us three to go down to the south. She was a single mom. So, but she also used that time to consider just staying in the south, and she was a residential school survivor. So one of the reasons she gave me for moving down to the south was that she had a dark past up in Iqaluit, and so she left. Also, she was working for the government as a translator, and for whatever reason as well, Ottawa seemed like to be a good place. So I grew up there. My mom being a single mom with her older daughter, 14 years old, it was difficult for her. And luckily, there was So that was in 1988. So luckily at that time, there was an organization called Tangasuving Inuit in Ottawa. And so they were an Inuit specific resource center. So my mom was able to have support from there. We were able to eat country food and be with each other and practice language and learn the Inuit way of being and just be amongst each other, which was really nice. After a while, she met her partner, her longtime partner, and had 3 more children. But when I was 12 years old, my mom, she left our family. And, trying to unravel that, trying to understand it, and trying to understand why, as an Inuk person, did I feel so different than everyone else around me? Like, why was it a common theme that Indigenous people seem to have a lesser quality of life than non-Indigenous people? Why was that so common? And I think trying to understand it, trying to understand my pain, trying to understand my mom's pain really shaped me and really steered the life that I live now. Because what I do now is I teach Inuit culture. I try and fight systemic racism and systemic bias by teaching about what happened to Inuit in Canada. And I found that a lot of people don't realize that we also had our own residential schools. We also had our own history with the genesis of Canada. And we ended up with different benefits. And so there's so many reasons why I do what I do, but I'll leave it up to you, Heather, to ask the next question because I feel like I went on for a bit there.
Oh no, thank you for sharing that vulnerability and that openness. And it really does help us to understand. As I mentioned, I don't know a lot about the Inuit culture, their ways of being. I know that you and I have had a conversation about how here in Anishinaabe we have our 7 grandfather teachings. Well, you have your own teachings. Would you like to talk to that a little bit? Or give us a snapshot of what that looks like as an essential part of, your ways of being.
For sure. Maybe I'd like to start off with a story. The way that I teach is through story and personal experience. So when I was younger, growing up in Ottawa, you know, we have these notions when we're children that, are very innocent, very non-judgmental. And so whenever I saw like a deeper colored skinned person, I resonated with them in a sense that they're probably Indigenous. And so I ended up having a neighbor who was a First Nations kid, and their mom was very dark skinned. And I was so excited to meet her because the rest of my neighbors weren't Indigenous. And so I went there and I just thought automatically we would connect. And so welcoming, right? And then I realized that this woman was very much different than I was. Like it wasn't an automatic connection like I had with my Inuk peers. However, it felt the same, but it also felt different. So trying to understand that, like, I guess what I'm trying to say is, when you look at someone, right, and like they're from your culture, you just get this understanding right away. And then when you look at someone that's not from your culture, there's more questions than there are answers. And I guess that's the feeling that I got. And so when I was a kid, I tried to understand it all, what's our differences and how are we the same? And so I would ask my mom these questions, because she's Inuk, right? So, and she was my safe space. I could ask her anything. So, I would say, so after we died, do we go to heaven or hell? And then she's just like, what? We don't, that's not how Inuit, that's not how we believe. That's not how we do. There's not really a heaven or a hell. But there's more layers to that. And because she was Inuk and because of the way that there was oppression in our culture, much the same as people experienced down here in the South, was for her. So sometimes she would share things and sometimes she wouldn't. I guess it would just depend on her mood. But anyway, So I thought, okay, not a good enough answer. Like, you didn't solve my problem here. So then I tried understanding it from a Christian perspective. Okay. So if it's true that if I'm good, I go to heaven, and if I'm bad, I go to hell. And if God and Jesus seem to know everything, then I figured on my own, then we must be God's play toys. So I came to her with this theory. I said, are we God's play toys since he knows everything about us? And she just got really mad. And she said, how could you say that? No. So here I am, a young kid still trying to understand it. Then I see a really dark skinned, beautiful First Nations man. And I think golden nugget, right? This guy's going to answer it for me. So Indigenous. Now, I know that people like us Indigenous people don't like to be considered the golden nugget or the Indigenous token. I want to acknowledge that right now. But for me, I was a kid, maybe 6 or 7, and or maybe 8 or 9, but trying to understand it all, right? And we get our notions from TV and all this stuff. So I go to him, walk up to him, and I say, okay, so you must have the answer. So when I die, what happens? And I'm just waiting for this all to make sense. And he goes, well, you know what? When we die, our bodies go into the soil, we turn into grass and flowers and trees. That was it for me. That's all I needed. That made the most sense to me. No heaven or hell, no complicated stuff. Like he did, he answered it for me, and I was okay with that. And so, talking about Inuit values, Inuit have Wiijinokiiwag, and there are 8 of them. And in these values, there's not talk about heaven or hell or being a good person or being a bad person in terms of having consequence. It's more about having a personal responsibility for harmony, being connected with the land, being connected with each other, but most of it is that responsible and accountability aspect. So, Inuit culture for many is more about being in the land than it is about anything else. And there's several layers to Inuit culture that's very contrasting to First Nations culture. And I can only speak to First Nations culture and to what I have been exposed to during my time in Barrie and in Sudbury. And as an Inuk, I try to understand my culture in deeper depth because I found that in Simcoe County, I was learning more about the First Nations way than I was the Inuk way. And although I was gaining more friendships and connections and feeling that Indigenous connection, which I so very much needed, there was still this feeling, this lost feeling, this piece of me that wasn't being fulfilled. And in recognizing that, I decided to learn more about my culture. And I also decided that I still wanted to be part of my Indigenous community. They have given me so much, teaching me the First Nations way, the medicine wheel, and various perspectives that helped me in healing. I also wanted to give back. And so I was able to teach a 4-part series through the Barrie Friendship Native Center. And Vanessa Kennedy gave me that space to do that. And so I was able to be part of my Indigenous community, but bringing it in a way that was fulfilling to me and helpful to the community. So that's one of the reasons of why people have reached out to me so much, is because during that 4-part series, anyone was allowed to join, anyone could come. And I ended up being reached out to from the St. Clair College and the University of Victoria. And it was just a wonderful platform. And part of the reason why I started to do the Urban Inuit Identity Project full time.
Yes, and great segue to that. First of all, before we go into that, I want to say thank you so much for bringing up what was it that you called the Indigenous man that was going to have all the answers? What did you call him?
Indigenous like token or golden nugget.
Your golden nugget. Inside of the Working Together program, we actually break this down because there is a lot of that happens. That yearning for understanding and knowledge, especially in light of everything that has happened in the last couple of years. Really, we don't know where to begin as a society and as a world, right? And we just want to begin somewhere. It's kind of like you were at that age of 6, yearning for this knowledge. But what happens is that sometimes we end up wanting it so badly that we are looking for that golden nugget, or what we call it inside the program, the mystical Indian. And there is not such a thing. There is, there just is that human, that person that is there, that we know full well as a result of the genocide that happened with colonization, and the history behind us. We are getting various sides of that. So I always want to bring it to everyone's attention when we have these conversations that we have to be very mindful of the fact on both sides of this, that we're slipping. Tokenization is a very slippery slope, and we may not realize we're doing it whenever we're leaning in, in that way to be able to do it. But also understanding from our side of things that we only know what we know, right? And so we have to work together on this to say, okay, wait a minute, you're slipping down the slope that I'm not really, fond of right now, but let's bring it back here. Let's figure this out together, right? So thank you for bringing that up. And before we talk about your project, I really, if you can, I would like to speak to a little bit about the residential school system that happened for the Inuit people. I did not realize, so thank you for bringing this awareness here, that it was also happening on that side. I mean, again, inside the program, we talk about how, so many of us have been displaced and moved around and moved from our areas that you just don't know. And that unpacking, of the impacts is so large, because in our afternoon segment, we look at that medicine wheel and we break that medicine wheel apart. But to have your voice here to say, yeah, it happened in my community, in my peoples too, is such a great gift to be able to sharing, to bring that awareness that, wow, it's not just First Nations, it's not just, there are several. So if you could speak to that a little bit about, yeah, if you could just speak to that, I'm going to leave it there.
Yeah. So, um, okay. So I just want to rewind back to the last part of we were talking about indigenize token and stuff like that. So I do want to say that as Indigenous people, we are expected to represent Indigenous people. Some of us don't want to be representatives. Of course, we just want to be in our culture. We just want to be in accompaniment with each other. And then there's some of us who would like to teach about it, like me. And then there's this extra pressure of having to have all the answers, having to represent. And that can be a frustrating piece too, because I am human. I can't represent everything. And being an Inuk person myself, I can't represent all 4 land claim regions. I do come from Nunavut, and my stories and cultural view comes from the Baffin region. So I can't share every perspective, but the Inuit way with Inuit Kayumayu Takumi is pretty much generalized amongst the 4 land claim regions in that way. And there's common theories and strings that do meld us together as Inuit. So, but our myths and things like that do break down differently. And also our languages are different as well. And our creation stories can be different. So just so that the audience is aware. And then for the residential schools, they were also called federal day schools or hostels. So these are terms that many people don't know that residential schools fell under. So if you're reading an article that says hostel in the north, that actually means residential school. So yeah, and over in Inuvialuit and Nunatsiavut, these are two land claim regions, polar opposite sides. There was colonization earlier than the center part of the land claim regions. And so in my area, Iqaluit, colonization actually happened in the 1940s and 1950s. So residential schools and colonization is very fresh for us. And this is a completely new concept. And we're still very much in the understanding phase of how balance works. And part of that includes money, right?
Yeah.
So money wasn't available to us or mixed in our way of life until sort of recent history. And that's why when you look at Inuit Kayumayutakmi, the focus is on each other and not on personal gain. When you think about money, for us, the way we live now, money is very much a personal gain thing. So you get this money and you store it in your bank account. And the more you have it there, the better yourself is. But for Inuit culture, that's not reflected at all in our ways of being. And I think it's a wonderful way to live. And our elders teach us that once we have something, we should share it because plentifulness is not all the time. So yes. And then the residential schools were very traumatic. So Inuit children were picked up by nuns and priests and government workers and sent to various areas. Some of them were closer by. Unfortunately, others were further away. So children were actually picked up and flown out. And I'm sure that a lot of the stories are similar, but it's interesting to know that residential schools and colonization happened all around the world at the same time. So we're talking about New Zealand and Australia.
Yeah.
I have a very painful story. And so when I was 20 years old, after being well enough and healed enough to save enough money to work well for myself, to apply for a passport. And when I say that I was well enough, I mean, I had a lot of baggage. People with baggage or trauma tend to not work on themselves, but I luckily had and came across someone who cared enough to take the time to spend with me to unravel that baggage. And so, he's my partner, Mike.
Okay.
And so he helped me. So we got our passports together and we went for a world tour. So we went to Australia and New Zealand, and I ended up staying at like a hostel type thing. It was a monastery that wasn't making enough money. And so they decided to change their rooms into like hostel type situation for backpackers. Mike and I were backpacking. I'm not saying that we had tons of money, but we had enough to buy flight tickets and stay in the cheapest place we could.
Yeah.
And so in this monastery, was a place that trained priests and nuns to be priests and nuns.
Okay.
So I got curious and I went into their boardroom and I started looking through their books because I know that Catholics were very good record keepers. So I opened up one of their books and I started reading because I'm always curious. And one of the passages included that, from the perspective of the writer, that the monks were savages. I was so angry. I was so angry at reading that. I couldn't even keep reading. I had to shut it. Of course, I read it one more time to make sure that's what it read, but it said that the monks were savages. And I thought, aren't monks like one of the peacefulest people like there is? And why are they using that word so broadly like that? And it spoke to me that, wow, like I hadn't pieced it together that at that time that residential schools also happened in New Zealand too. And once I read that, I got curious, and I asked the local Indigenous people what their story was in terms of the Europeans that ended up there, and they told us that there also was residential schools there too. It made me so very angry. I was going to steal the book, but I didn't, because I just knew that it would make me so mad, and I just left it there. I just decided, no, I'm not. So,
Not going to carry that around with you, right?
right,
Right? You're already carrying it around with you, but not physically carrying it around with you.
right.
Oh
Mm.
man. Again, thank you for the share and for the honesty and the openness because it's very helpful. Before we jump into the Inuit Identity Project, the Urban Inuit Identity Project, I wonder. So you talk to your culture as having stories. There was something else I caught in there, and I didn't write it down because I was scribbling here while you were talking to come back. But how we talk about oh darn, what was it? When you sit down with your elder and they're sharing those ways of knowing, are there ways of like are there ways of knowing that you follow and creation stories and those kinds of things? Um, Yeah, let's go there.
Okay, good question. So, when I was growing up, I visualized my culture as being very weird.
Okay.
And when I say that, I mean that our creation stories are pretty weird. I mean, there's humans turning into animals, animals turning into humans. Creation stories are super complex, and they include cannibalism and incest. But when I say they're weird, I mean that they're really hard to believe as facts of life, that that's for sure how we were created, because if you actually read the text, they're so out there. And so when I try to explain to people about Inuit creation stories, they're more about life lessons and teachings than they are to say, like how the Bible says it with Adam and Eve. And some people take that so literally, and if they do, that's okay. It doesn't bother me any which way someone believes and chooses to believe in spirituality. But even the Goliath story, so Inuit culture has like these very intricate stories that are just, for example, the sun and the moon. So one of these creation stories was about how did the sun become to be and how did the moon become to be. So I don't know the words right off the top of my head, but I'll give it to you. So before there was light, this was a time when there was complete darkness, and there was an igloo with a family in it, and then a community igloo, and several igloos around there were family igloos. There was a young woman, and she chose not to go to the community igloo because there was a party going on there. And this happened every single week. She decided not to go to the party, and it's in complete darkness. So she stayed in her home igloo. And in the middle of the night, someone would come into her igloo and take advantage of her. They wouldn't say who they were, of course, and she couldn't figure out who they were. So they were abusing her. One night, she decided to put soot on her hands. And when the person came to take advantage of her, she put the soot onto his face. And when she went to the community igloo, she lit her stick on fire. And that's where the soot came from, like the fire soot. So she took her stick on fire, went to the community igloo, and looked around the faces. And then she could see who it was. And it was actually her brother. Her brother was the one taking advantage of her. So she started chasing him with the stick in her hand. And so she chased him so many times around the world and so fast that she turned into the sun and he turned into the moon. And
Oh,
so on the moon, there's these black splotches.
yeah.
So that's the soot. So it also, the variations in the moon and sun cycle, meaning that the moon sometimes comes faster around or slower around, and that's to do with the angle of the world.
Mhm.
But when we talk about that, it also moves slower or faster for the moon. And so the sun can catch up a bit. And so when the sun catches up, that's the sister feeding the brother, the moon. And when they're further apart, she gets angry again and she distances herself from him.
Okay.
So when I say that creation story, there's just several of those types of creation stories.
Yeah.
The one that the one true thing that Inuit believe to be, if we had to believe in one thing, because we don't have an overarching creator or God that we pray to, it would be Sila, which is weather. And Sila is also nature. So they're equivalent to Mother Nature, but they're not a boy and they're not a girl, they're just a being. And so that is the reflection of Inuit culture, being that even in our language, we don't refer to he's and she's or boys and girls. We just talk about a person. And so we believe in harmony with ourselves and the land and Sila. We believe that Sila is a being, but they're not the being that created everything. They're just part of this, what we have. So this kind of thinking is different. I don't know if I've encountered it anywhere else. And then another unique aspect is that we are still spiritual people. In that meaning, when someone dies in our family, we inherit that family member's name. And in that way, we keep the spirit on it. So it's like a form of reincarnation. So in all of my life and trying to understand the spiritual world, I have had many questions: heaven and hell, Christianity,
Mhm.
First Nations way, and atheism way. And for me, the way that I believe things is that every soul has a choice to what they want to believe. So if I choose that I want to be in the reincarnation way, then I will choose to be in the reincarnation way. And I say that because when elders choose a name for a baby, they wait for that spirit to come in their dream and to make themselves known. And when they do that, they come into the dream over and over again. They're choosing that they want to be in the next body of the new baby. So
And that
that's
is in your culture?
yes.
Okay. Yep.
This is Inuit culture.
Yep.
So there is a spirituality aspect of it. It's a very autonomous culture and a choice driven culture and less of a regimented one. If we were to be regimented in any way back before colonization, it was watching for taboos, and you don't want to break those taboos. So in amongst comparison to First Nation cultures, I don't know if we compare because I don't know enough about spirituality in First Nations way, although I wish I did understand it more and I wish I was invited to more ceremonies because I would just love that. But I know that they're sacred. It's just, it would be wonderful to me. And I don't know. I just, when I say all of that, Heather, what do you think?
Well, you know what? I think that I mean, I tell you very openly, I'm a two-eyed seer, right? So I'm both Western and I'm both Indigenous, and I'm on my journey of opening up my whole Indigenous side of things and learning my culture and those ways of knowings that have been innately embodied in me, or put in me, but I didn't understand. So when I hear your culture, I can hear that I can hear similarities. I see that though across all of these conversations, right? With all of the indigenous peoples that I have conversation with, that we all have our own creations, our own stories, our own ways of being. And that's the beauty that makes us uniquely different. But also it speaks to, in my own culture, the creation stories of we will be walking the world with many different colors, many different peoples, many different experiences. Everything in all our culture has a spirit. So when you were talking about the naming of the child, and the coming in the dreams. I don't have my name. I'm getting my name soon. But that is a process in itself too. But what I caught from that is that I am offering tobacco to my elder, and I'm sleeping and sitting on that tobacco, holding the intention of who I am, and what my spirit is saying, for 4 days before I hand that tobacco over. Then they do the same thing on the other side, is sit with that to get and hear what they need to hear. So there's a similar thread that's there. I also picked up on, that you all live, your ways of knowing are in harmony as a whole. There's not really any labeling that happens, or that gender identification that happens. And to be quite honest with you, as I dig deeper and deeper into my own culture, we weren't doing that either. I mean, if we go back in community, children were just children. They were not girl nor boy until, they were at that point where they were having their ritual ceremonies that would happen, their moon ceremonies, or going out on their quests and those kinds of things. So they were allowed that autonomy to just freely be in that openness of creation. From my own culture, we talk about the 7 stages of life, and the Macon's teaching on how we move through all of that stuff, and we move through these journeys in that way that we're learning. Inside the program, we talk about the 7 stages of life, and we wrap it into the medicine wheel to give people the idea of, at different ages, what would be expected and what from each side. That in our culture, we sit with our elders, and our children sit with us, and we sit across from each other, because we're teaching and we're learning. It's a gift and it's a lesson, both at one time, right? So it's that reciprocal value. So I really appreciate you sharing that. And we have our own stories that we're like, what was that? That's kind of weird. But there are stories, right? And it doesn't speak to who we are. And I especially want to point that out, because I think that for the longest time we were all made out to be such savages, right? Like, even the way that we are depicted in Disney characters, in movies, and all of those things. And it was not that. It was simply that misunderstanding, that there was no ability to understand, or there was no real acceptance of learning to understand the whys behind all these things. So yeah, thank you. I appreciate that very, very much. Um, okay, I've got lots of questions on my sheet here. Um, but I want to talk about the Urban Inuit Identity Project. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, so I created the Urban Inuit Identity Project because of my own personal experience as being an urban Inuk, in Simcoe County. So when I was 14, I was still in Ottawa, but by that time my mom, she left. She was gone for 2 years. It's extremely painful. And my dad, my stepdad, asked me if I would like to stay behind and be with my mom, and that all 3 girls would go with him, and to move to Welland, Ontario, because he needed more support, because he was a single father and raising 4 girls was really difficult. And I thought, how are you even asking me if I will stay with my mom? Like, she betrayed me. She left. She didn't even make a phone call. And you're asking me if I will stay with her. And I didn't hesitate. I was like, no, I'm going with you. So the 4 of us girls and my dad, we moved to Welland, Ontario, where he would have more support with his family, because that's where he's from. Also, his dad was passing away at the time. And I was there from 14 until 19 years old. That's where I encountered my first racism because that was a smaller community. Ottawa is multicultural and celebrated for multiculturalism. And when I went to Welland, the neighbor across the street from me told me to go back to my country. So it was scary. It was scary because he lived across the street from me. How was I supposed to walk to school? Was I going to get murdered? I don't know.
Yeah, your safety mechanism is just blown away. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I also ended up taking a job as in a retirement home where there was older generation there. And I'm talking like this is early 2000s where some of these women could have been teachers at residential schools and they were set in their ways. And that was also difficult. And I just learned how to be prim and proper the way that they wanted me to be. That way I could get my paycheck and, not to upset them. So I learned how to start navigating in a way that was very quiet for me. As you can imagine, I'm an outspoken person. Anyway, so in Welland, Ontario, there were friendship centers, and I ended up leaving my household when I was 17 and living with a wonderful family who was First Nations, and it was cool. I was like, loved them. They had their tobacco box and they had really big dream catchers and they were so welcoming, and it just was really cool to be there. But the Inuit way wasn't there. And at that point in my life, I was having so much trauma. My stepdad was an alcoholic and he still is. And, of course, if you have a parent who's a residential school survivor, the likelihood of being abused is higher. And so I didn't have exactly, a very easygoing childhood. And so when I was 17 or 18, it wasn't at the top of my list to regain my culture. I was just surviving at that point. So I left everything as it was. Then finally, I had enough of my own self. I had enough of the trauma and I wanted to do better. And so I chose to leave Welland, Ontario and made it to Collingwood, Ontario. And that's when I started to change my life around. I quit smoking and started to try to view myself in a better light after being abused and trying to understand a bunch of stuff while trying to still unravel my mom and why she left. And through learning about residential schools, I started to understand more. I became less resentful of my mom. I did ignore my mom for 2 years, which must have been very hurtful for her. But, when you're hurt, you kind of hurt back. And once I started realizing, I forgave her, and my mom and I, we improved our relationship. We got back on speaking grounds, which was really nice. And I missed her a lot. And she came to visit Collingwood. And I started to want to be back part of the Indigenous culture. So I would go to powwows and buy jewelry and, insert myself. So I made a few friends. And I went to the Barrie Friendship Native Center, and that's how I got involved with Vanessa Kennedy. And I said to her, I want to regain my Inuit culture. And she said, well, you're going to have to be the one that teaches me on that. And so I was like, okay, all right. And, she was obviously upset. She wanted to know more. And so it's kind of different around Simcoe County, I've found, because there are Inuit here. We haven't gathered in a way that I hope for. I'm trying to change that. And Vanessa said to me that while she was working at the BNFC, there had been Inuit that gone there, but because there wasn't enough Inuit culture or understanding about it, they just decided not to return. Some Inuit, though, when they feel that, will decide, I want my Indigenous peers, I want my Indigenous friends. I'm going to keep going, and I'm going to learn whatever teachings they want to teach me and become part of the culture. And for many Inuit, that is wonderful. And for me, it was wonderful. However, I did say that that piece was missing. I got well enough to enter college. A lot of us Indigenous, never unpackage that baggage in a healthy way in order to be able to take on a responsibility like college or university. But luckily, I was able to work on that. Someone had taken the time to invest in me to learn, to help me learn how to cope. And I enrolled in the medical laboratory technology program up in Sudbury, Ontario. And I chose that place because that school had the most Indigenous population, and I wanted to be with my peers. I wanted to be with my peers there and feel supported. They also had an Indigenous center where Indigenous people could just go and be themselves. And that was really important to me because I grew up with my Inuit culture. I have a different worldview and a different lens. I view land and nature as being like a top priority for mental health and well-being. And I wanted to be with people who also believed in that and valued that. So I went there and it was great. I had Indigenous people around all the time, and I could just speak with them and be with them. And whenever the pressure of school got too much, I could go there and just cry my eyes out. And an Indigenous counselor could understand. And, they would just be like, is your teacher helping you? Come here whenever you need to, and just supported me, because in my program, I was the only Indigenous person there, and I was learning Western science. It was extremely competitive. And I'm a competitive person. So that meant I had to work really hard. And these people who were competing against me had this enormous amount of privilege, which they didn't realize that I was trying to get to the same place as them. It's a little bit harder, when you realize that you're competing against someone to get a placement that's so sought for, but their mom works there already. So for an Indigenous person, it's just like, okay, all right, my people have been damaged for so long, and I'm going to compete against you, which your place is already set.
Yeah.
So
And
that
that's a
was
truth and reality that, our generation has been facing, and that is a ripple of what, this residential school system colonization has happened. Like that this is what it has caused, and it really sparks a little bit of fire in me, and in something that I talk about inside the program, that, people who are now identifying and acknowledging and thinking that, okay, well, we got it figured out now, right? And how could you possibly be feeling the ramifications of that 3 generations down the way? Well, the truth and reality is that in, 50, 100 years, a whole wheel was decimated. And then those people that came back and they created a flawed wheel, right? Because they only knew what they knew. And for the most part, those that did come back had missing spokes of that wheel that were gone, that there was pieces scattered everywhere. So they came back to try and implement a structure of ways of knowing and living and culture that had literally been, I keep using this word, decimated, like absolutely decimated. So when you take a look at that from that perspective and you say, holy hell, how do we show up in this way? And like you said, you call it baggage. I've got my own, unpacking that baggage is hard work, but it is critical work. However, there are still pieces of us that, I'm sure that even now sometimes you find yourself laying down a piece of yourself outside of a Western door before you go into it. On an energetic level, right? So I need to fit the mold, right? And I'm very much of the mind of bringing that education and that awareness now that says, no, I'm tired of bringing pieces of myself to you. I am whole, I am here, I'm complete. And yes, I was impacted because my thread of language, of culture, of connection, of belonging was done. That doesn't mean that I don't have a right to pick it up now. And that could take 3 more generations or 4 more generations. And I think that that speaks to what you're talking to as well, right? We're all here trying to do this, and the competition is fierce. The truth and reality is that when you come from that trauma, um, it is so hard to just show up and to be present in this system that is so systematic, does not see you, hear you, or even view you in a way that gives you the opportunity to succeed,
Yeah.
right?
So I was so thankful for my Indigenous services there, like on the days that we were picking our placements. So I was picking Royal Victoria Regional Health Center because that's a top-notch hospital, but more importantly, my sister was having a baby. And she's Inuk, and our mom wasn't around. She passed away when I was 26 from alcoholism. We are urban Inuit, meaning we don't have other Inuit around that are in our immediate family. Like I said, my mom took us from Iqaluit down. So I can't say that I have several cousins and uncles and grandparents near me. I can't say that. So it meant so much to me. And I was so competitive. And in order to get that Royal Victoria Regional Health Center spot, there was only two. One was spoken for already. And I competed so hard that I went to my Indigenous services and I cried. And I just was, and there were other people applying to that same spot. And I was just like, I understand that they're good students and they have wants and needs like I do, but I'm coming from Collingwood, which is real close to Barrie. My sister's having a baby, and my mom was a residential school survivor. It took me 5 times the effort to get here. So please read this letter and please save me that spot. And it was hard being the only Indigenous student in that class because it was like I was teaching them, right? I was teaching them about their privilege. But the teachers there listened and they saw my hard work and they placed me there. No doubt that I worked real hard for that. And when I got there, first of all, in the MLT program, which is a 3-year program, we had one day that we were going to talk about Canadians' health and the 12 determinants of health. And I thought, okay, here it is. We're all going to learn about what happened to Indigenous people and why are some Indigenous communities in deplorable conditions and why are some Indigenous people don't trust institutions. And I thought we're going to explore that because obviously that makes good, compassionate healthcare workers. And in that 3-hour class, we didn't talk about it.
Yeah.
So I remembered that. And when I went to my placement at RVH, now I was taken out of my Indigenous environment with my support. And I was with 120 other lab staff, and not one was Indigenous. And here I was again, trying to be the Indigenous representative, trying to advocate for Indigenous to be included, Indigenous people to be included, and trying to show that Indigenous people aren't stereotypes. And it was a difficult challenge. And there were many times where I felt like, wow, I wish I had some of my Indigenous peers here with me. And through all of my experience, it was very much needed that Inuit history and Inuit culture needs to be taught to our healthcare workers and to people involved in the circle of care of Inuit people, because after a while, if people don't know about us, we tend to get lonely and we start to take on different cultures and we start to lose our own. And for the Urban Inuit Identity Project, I saw that. And I also know that my experience in searching for that connection is not unique. I know that there's other Inuit who are wanting that. And what I'm trying to do with the Urban Inuit Identity Project is teach people who are trying to support Inuit the way that is culturally appropriate for them to return to culture if they lost it, or just to feel that they're being seen. After some time of not being seen in an Inuk way, it felt very marginalizing. And when I say that, I mean, it happens on so many levels, like even in hospitals, at the dental office, when I go and get my prescription medications, these places don't know what an N number is. And what that is for us to receive our healthcare benefits. And then when I say that to receive our healthcare benefits, it's not that we're getting free things, right? We have bargained for these things in order to share our land. So it's just, there's so many teaching and learning opportunities that I want to provide to Simcoe County and Grey County. Being of my personal experience is that not enough people know about us, and it would be really nice if they did.
It would. And thank you for bringing that up because it is so important to have this conversation around that. Now, I know that you have an N number, where I have a band card that I use, that I for my benefits for all of those things. And I'll tell you, for the longest time, based on this whole experience, I did not have my status because I was fighting the racism within my own community of, oh, well, it's just, why do you think you deserve that? And me not knowing everything that I know now, and collecting or connecting to my culture to realize, oh my God, this is not about any of that. This is like, do you know what happened, right? And the truth is, they don't have a clue of what happened, right? But they also cannot continue to have these conversations around, this is a privilege to have this card, and you're just saving money that, and I'm speaking on my side of things, you're just presenting that card to save money. Like, why can't you pay it like all the rest of us, and why, are you doing that? Why do you think that you're special? These are words that I've heard. Why do you think that you're so special that you can get this free instead of, or that you, well, guess what? We don't get anything free. All right. We get supports that are there because, as you mentioned, they were bargained for. They were a means of what was, it was a transaction of what was taken, for so many years, and the impacts of that. And why shouldn't I be able to say, hey, I'm going to use my card here to maybe get, a diabetic medicine that's not covered under regular benefits or OHIP. I'm entitled to do that, right? It's not about the money. It's not about, and everybody thinks too on this side, oh, well, you're all getting that treaty money, right? Well, I'll tell you, I've not gotten a treaty cent. And it doesn't matter. I didn't do it for this. I did it to say to my Nan up there, that your voice didn't go silent for no reason at all. Your voice has voice now. I'm picking up those pieces. This is who I am. Like it, lump it, I don't care. This is who I am. And I think that, even that N number, I mean, do you have an actual card or is it a number? So you have just a number. And I know that when I go in to say, okay, well, I have status, right? So you go into medical professional offices like the dentist, or some dentists don't even, they're like, nope, don't want nothing to do with it. It's too long of a process. Same with the eye doctors. So we can actually physically give a card. If you can't give a card, then it's a whole other roadblock that gets put up that denies you the services that you are entitled to.
I know. And, it's just like, even in, for example, someone who requires an ambulance ride, some Inuit will be asked for their status card to say that, do you want this billable service paid for? And for Inuit, it's just like, okay, no one's taught you. It's clear that you're not being trained about the various ways that Indigenous people bill for things. That is marginalization. And here I am, who requires medical treatment, to have to tell you that there's Inuit people too, that we don't have status cards and that we have N numbers. And now on top of that, we don't have a card.
Yep.
So it's very confusing for the healthcare provider. However, wouldn't be confusing if they were taught about that. which they
Absolutely.
should be, which it shouldn't be up to the person who requires medical treatment. Let's say if they got stabbed, to tell the person that.
No.
And it's just, and it happens so often. There have been maybe 1 or 2 times in Simcoe County where I didn't have to explain it. And it's just like, wow, I don't have to talk to you for 10 minutes and explain this whole process. You already know. That's amazing. I'm just so thankful for that.
Mm-hmm. So your N number, do you have a number and then do you submit it or do you give that number to the provider?
So same like what you were experiencing is the dentist may not want to do it. Like they can bill on behalf of us if I just give it to them. If they think it's too much work, I can pay it front and then bill to NIHB.
Okay. All right.
So
Okay.
yeah.
I want you to know that inside of the Working Together Wiijinokiiwag program, we actually take our second half day and we give healthcare and mainstream organizations we talk about the self-identification process. You know, we talk about making sure that it is an open door, open asking question instead of a shutting the door question. What is it that we need to bring to their awareness? What does a number look like? I am going to bring this into that. I'm going to put that in there so that there is an awareness of there are other communities and peoples that have different ways, but you need to make sure that you're investigating to make sure that you're honoring all those things because again, are we just ticking boxes, right? So right now there's blanket self-identification forms. First Nation, Inuit, okay, what does that mean? We ask the questions of mainstream providers. So now where do you go with that? What does that mean for you?
Yeah, there's one
What
more step. It's the N number. It's just
yeah,
one more step after that.
yeah, right? Yeah, and
Yeah.
what this is. So I thank you for bringing that awareness, and please know that we will definitely work on together in getting that inside of there as well, so that we're best representing all of our people. So miigwech for that. I appreciate that. So you created the Urban Inuit Identity Project as a way and a means and community and a teachable project that can go to people to help them learn. I know that you do little boxes. Do you happen to have one there with you or do you want to talk to that?
I think I do. Let me see. I've got everything is such a mess.
That's okay. That's okay. And if
Yeah,
you don't, that's okay too.
okay,
We can just talk about it.
okay. I think I'll probably just talk about it. Everything is such a mess.
That's okay.
But yeah, so the Urban Inuit Identity Project, in my personal experience in healthcare in Simcoe County, is the major reason why I created that. And it's meant to teach healthcare workers and healthcare providers about Inuit way of being and their role in marginalizing Inuit in healthcare. As an urban Inuk, I found that people, when you hear the word Indigenous in Simcoe County, it's immediately First Nations. That's the thought. And people, like I say, know so much more about First Nations than they do know about Inuit. And so I created the Urban Inuit Identity Project to target healthcare workers, to get involved with the managers who are managing Indigenous patient facilitators to say, hey, do you know about the Inuit way of being and spirituality too? Because if you don't, I can teach you about that.
Yeah.
And I find that what's happening around Simcoe County is that because Inuit art here is in large population, that we're often forgot about, and that can happen right at one of the main places that people learn about Indigenous people, which is colleges and universities. So in colleges and universities, what's happening is that there's Indigenous courses and they're getting to learn various ways about being Indigenous, meaning the different sects of First Nations cultures, different ways of believing, and then they forget about the Inuit way. And so people get involved in these big positions. So people who take these Indigenous courses might not be Indigenous. I know Indigenous people know there's various ways of being Indigenous, even amongst First Nations people.
100%.
And someone who learns from that course might think, okay, there's many ways to be Indigenous in the First Nations way, and there's only one way to be Indigenous, but that's the First Nations way.
Yeah.
So they get this powerful position, and because why do they get this powerful position in the first place? Because a lot of Indigenous people, like I say, have to work 5 times as hard to become healthy enough to enter that mainstream education, right? So they might not have a bachelor's or a master's in order to get those positions. So what happens is non-Indigenous people take those positions. And because if they go through those programs and they don't understand that Inuit have our own way of being, they become decision makers for the Indigenous population in that area. So what's happening is decision makers are making decisions without thinking about us Inuit. And so my job at the Urban Inuit Identity Project is to knock politely and say, hey, did you forget about us?
Yes.
Do you know about the several ways of being Indigenous? So yes. And so what I've done is I've also created the Inuk box. And what the Inuk box is, it's a teaching tool for the service provider. And what that does is when I tell people that, for Inuit, the medicines in the medicine wheel did not naturally grow in the Arctic. So when I say that to them, I say, it's not normal or the cultural norm for us to smudge. And people don't want to be culturally appropriating, and they want to do the best that they can. So when I tell them that, they just get a little antsy. They're like, oh,
yeah.
now what am I going to do?
The fear of all of this creates, that's what we talk about in my program is fear is the big thing. We don't know how to talk about it and talk through it and have these conversations and know and identify that it's just different for you. It's okay. So tell me, right? Educate me. That's okay.
Yes. And I just say, I say, if an Inuk person is known in their culture and they understand their culture, they'll accept a smudge from you and they'll do it in a way that still empowers them. Yeah. However, if an Inuk is around and has been urbanized for a long time and they don't know what it means to be Inuk, they might start taking the smudging on in a way that is not appropriate for the Inuk culture. And now what I'm saying is I'm not saying that it's wrong to smudge. I smudge. I've got my own smudge bowl. I've learned to accept this wonderful medicine and I use it and I'm so thankful for it. But when I say to, let's say someone, and I say it's not, culturally normal for us to smudge, they get a little antsy. They're like, okay, well, what do I do then? What do I offer then? I said, well, you can smudge, but just, do it this way. And then I say, what would be really nice for your client is for them to be identified as Inuit. So place something Inuit specific in their hand, make them feel seen. So the Inuk box, although it is a really nice gesture, it helps with that. So I do have the box. I don't have the contents in it because I placed everything, but this is the Inuk box.
Yeah.
So I've designed this stamp on it, and it's a way of passing something to someone else to say, here you go, I see you. And for Inuit, we're so used to not being seen for being Inuit. This gesture would be amazing. And inside the Inuk box, there's 2 leaflets, 2 pieces of paper. One's for the service provider and one's for the Inuk. And they both have the same thing, but they explain it from different angles. So on the one paper, it's for the client provider, the provider, to say, okay, so you want to help the client in what way? Justice? Okay, there's Gladue writers here for Inuit specifically. Go to this link. Is your person wanting to return to culture? Here's some cultural links. Here's a return to language links. And then here's the Inuit values. And then for the client, it's, would you like to gain access to other peers? Here's a link to that. And also another one for returning to culture and language with the Inuit values. So it's a tool for both the provider and the Inuk. And then there's also, I include something that's Inuit specific inside the box, which is customizable. And at this current time, I have purchased a ton of sealskin ornaments that are going in because it's just nice to have something from the north. And many Inuit who have come from the north and live in the south might feel that they miss home. And just having something like that's sealskin made is just wonderful.
Yeah.
But these boxes are customizable, and it depends what the client provider is needing. What do they need? It's customizable in a sense that, are you providing social work in sense of justice work? Well, we're going to make it fit the justice pieces in there. Is it for family and child rearing? Well, we're going to target it to family and child rearing. So yeah, so it's just what I found is people who want to help Inuit sometimes feel like they're not doing it in a way that is helpful culturally to the Inuk, but also the person doesn't want to feel like an imposter while providing care, right? We want to feel like we are helping the best we can. And by giving that Inuk box, it's a bridge builder for both. It opens communication, and it empowers each other instead. And it also comes with one more piece of paper, which is a cultural piece. So I think it's a wonderful tool, and the BNFC has decided to purchase some, and so did Simcoe County District School Board. And I'm doing my best to get the awareness out for it. So
It's amazing. And I want to say to you that I would love to share the Urban Inuit Identity Project and the box as one of our resources, because within our program, we've created this database of services and providers that you can link to learn more about, so that we're stopping the silo work inside of mainstream organization, right? So if you're okay with that, then we're going to put you on that list as well, that they can reach out to you if they want to learn more, and also to order those boxes for the people in their care, if that's what they'd like to do. So
yes, I would very much love that. I think the more work that I do in Simcoe and Grey County, the more I'm going to feel fulfilled. And I definitely want as many people to know how to provide culturally appropriate care to our Inuit, especially people involved in caring for children. So that would be really wonderful.
well, you know what? We would really, really appreciate having that collaboration piece in there, that we can share that. And we bring awareness, and it's this bridging. We're bridging all of these worlds together. So, listen, I could go on for hours with you, for sure. But I know that we've went a little bit over our time here. I want to wrap with you, and ask you the question that I ask everyone when we're ending this segment, and that is, from your perspective, from all the things that you do, from your vantage point right now, what is the one giveaway or takeaway that you would like the community as a whole to know about you moving forward, and what you're bringing to all of this? Or what
The
do we need
biggest
to
thing,
change? Yes.
well, the biggest thing for me is the way I operate out of is human connection. So I want to be connected with my fellow Indigenous community. I want to bring what I can, and I think a lot of what I do is I'm also looking to be seen. See me as Inuk, see my people as Inuit, and let's work together and be Indigenous together and support each other. And I think that's the biggest message that I have.
It's amazing. Muckpaloo, thank you so very much for this time. I am so excited to be working alongside of you in community. For all of you out there, you also have the Indigenous Circle, Collingwood Indigenous Circle community. We have had one meeting at Alwyn, and I know it was a change of the season ceremony. I am so looking forward to the next one that's coming up in June, and learning about your specific ceremony and traditions around all of this, so that we can be better as all peoples that walk this world. So, from the bottom of my heart, thank you, Miigwech. And we don't say goodbye here, we say Bama P. And so I'm going to say Bama P till next time. And thank you so very much.
And Nekamik, thank you, and Bama P.
Awesome. All right. Thank you so much. Goodbye, everybody. We'll see you on the next segment. I will gather some information and we'll put that down below so that you can connect. And we'll see you on the road next in a couple of weeks whenever we have the next speaker series inside of our Voices of Change. So, miigwech, bama pee.
Miigwech.